Hello, my name is Sophia Catherine Reynolds. I'm 31 years old, currently living in Seattle, Washington. I am the founder of a sustainable fashion company called EcoThreads, which creates clothing from recycled materials and supports fair trade practices. If you met me today, you'd see a confident woman running a thriving business, speaking at conferences about environmental responsibility, and living what many would consider a dream life. But if you asked about my past, I'd tell you a story that began with abandonment, continued through years of feeling invisible in my own home, and eventually led to a moment of painful clarity that changed everything. If you've ever been betrayed by those you loved most, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're ready to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of manipulation. I was born an orphan. My earliest memory isn't of loving parents or a warm home, but of Sister Margaret at St. Catherine's Children's Home in Portland, Oregon. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and always smelled like lavender soap. I spent the first 4 years of my life there, watching other children get adopted while I remained behind. I didn't understand why no one wanted me, but I learned early to make myself useful, helping the younger children and trying to be the best little girl I could be. When I was 4, everything changed. A well-dressed couple came to visit the orphanage on a crisp October morning. David and Patricia Morrison were a picture-perfect family from the suburbs of Seattle. He was a successful real estate developer, she was a high school English teacher. They lived in a beautiful Tudor-style house in Queen Anne with a perfectly manicured garden and a golden retriever named Buster. They had been trying to have children for years, Patricia later told me, and adoption seemed like their answer to building the family they'd always dreamed of. I remember the day they took me home. Patricia held my small hand as we walked through their front door, and I was amazed by the warmth, the soft carpets, and the way sunlight streamed through the large windows. My new room was painted pale yellow with white furniture and stuffed animals arranged on the bed. "This is your home now, sweetheart," Patricia said, kneeling down to my level. "You're our daughter and we love you so much." David ruffled my hair and said, "Welcome home, little princess." For 3 years I believed I was the luckiest girl in the world. Patricia would read me bedtime stories, her voice gentle and soothing as she sat on the edge of my bed. David taught me to ride a bicycle in the driveway, running alongside me with his hand on my back, shouting encouragement. "You're doing it, Sophia. You're flying." We had Sunday morning pancakes where I helped flip them, usually making a mess that made them both laugh. Patricia would braid my hair before school, and David would drive me there in his BMW, playing my favorite songs on the radio. I called them Mom and Dad, and in my young heart, I truly believed they were mine forever. I felt secure, loved, and special. Patricia would tell me stories about princesses who found their true families, and I thought I was living my own fairy tale. David would carry me on his shoulders at the park, and I felt like I could touch the clouds. Those early years were painted in warm colors: golden morning light, Patricia's rose-colored sweaters, David's kind brown eyes when he looked at me. But fairy tales, I learned, don't always have happy endings. When I was 7, Patricia became pregnant. I remember the day she told me, sitting in the living room with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Sophia, honey, you're going to be a big sister," she said, pulling me into a hug. "We're having a baby." I was excited too, imagining teaching a little brother or sister all the things I knew, sharing my toys, and being the best big sister ever. Emily Rose Morrison was born on a snowy February morning. She was tiny and perfect, with David's dark hair and Patricia's green eyes. I stood outside the hospital room window, pressing my face against the glass, eager to meet my new sister. When they finally let me hold her, I was so careful, supporting her head just like the nurses showed me. "She's beautiful," I whispered, and Patricia smiled at me with what I thought was the same love she'd always shown. But something shifted when Emily came home. At first, I told myself it was natural. Babies need a lot of attention, and Mom and Dad were just tired. But as weeks turned into months, I began to notice things. Patricia's smiles became shorter when directed at me, more distracted. David stopped our evening walks, always too busy with Emily's bedtime routine. The bedtime stories became less frequent, then stopped altogether. I tried to help. I learned to change diapers, to warm bottles, to sing the lullabies I remembered Patricia singing to me. "Let me help, Mom," I'd say, but Patricia would gently push me away. "That's okay, sweetie. You don't need to worry about these things. Go play." But when I went to play, I felt hollow inside, like I was missing something important. The changes were subtle at first. Emily got new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs from friends' children. When I asked for a new dress for the school picture, Patricia sighed and said, "Sophia, we need to be practical. Emily is growing so fast and she needs things." But that weekend, I watched them buy Emily 3 new outfits at the mall, clothes she'd outgrow in months. When I was 8, the differences became impossible to ignore. Emily's first birthday party was a grand affair with a bouncing castle, professional decorations, and what seemed like half the neighborhood in attendance. I remembered my own 8th birthday a few months earlier, a small cake, just the 3 of us, and a single present, a book Patricia picked up at a used bookstore. "Books are the best gifts," she'd said, but I had seen Emily's pile of wrapped presents and wondered why books weren't the best gifts for her too. The breaking point came one evening when I was 9. Emily had started walking and gotten into Patricia's makeup drawer, covering herself and the bathroom mirror with lipstick and foundation. It was a disaster, red and pink smeared everywhere like a crime scene. I found her there and was trying to clean her up when Patricia walked in. "Sophia, what did you do to Emily?" she shouted, her face flushed with anger. "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice small. "I found her like this and was trying to help." "Don't lie to me," Patricia snapped, gathering Emily into her arms. "You're supposed to be watching her, not letting her make messes." "But I was in my room doing homework like you told me," I protested, tears starting to fall. Patricia looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, distant, almost angry. "Sophia, you need to understand something. Emily is my real daughter. You're adopted, and that means you need to try harder to be part of this family. You can't just expect things to be handed to you." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Real daughter. Adopted. Try harder. I stood there in the bathroom doorway, watching Patricia comfort Emily, and realized that everything I thought I knew about my place in this family was a lie. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Patricia's words echoing in my head. I had always known I was adopted. They'd told me that from the beginning, making it sound like a beautiful story about how much they wanted me. But now I understood that adopted meant different, meant less, meant I had to earn what Emily received simply by being born. From that day forward, I became hyper-aware of every interaction, every difference in treatment. When Emily cried, both parents rushed to comfort her. When I cried, I was told to use my words and handle things like a big girl. Emily's artwork covered the refrigerator while mine was politely admired and then put away. Emily got hugs and kisses freely while my affection felt rationed, conditional. I threw myself into being perfect. I excelled in school, bringing home straight A's and awards. I kept my room spotless, helped with household chores without being asked, and never complained about anything. I thought if I could just be good enough, smart enough, helpful enough, they would love me the same way they loved Emily. But perfection has a way of highlighting imperfection. The better I did, the more obvious it became that my achievements were expected rather than celebrated. When I won the school spelling bee, Patricia said, "That's nice, dear," and hung the certificate on the kitchen bulletin board behind Emily's finger painting. When Emily said her first complete sentence a few months later, they called David's parents to share the news and took videos to send to all their friends. High school brought new challenges. I wanted to join the drama club, but David said it was too expensive with all the costume costs. Emily, meanwhile, was enrolled in dance classes, piano lessons, and art camp each summer. When I asked about taking a part-time job to pay for my own activities, Patricia worried it would affect my grades. "Education is the most important thing for you, Sophia," she said. "You need to focus on getting scholarships." The message was clear. Emily's future was an investment they were happy to make. Mine was a problem I needed to solve myself. I spent most of my teenage years feeling like a ghost in my own home. I'd sit at the dinner table while David and Patricia discussed Emily's school projects, her friends, her interests, and I'd wonder what it would feel like to have parents who were equally invested in my life. I learned to retreat to my room, to find solace in books and studies, to build a wall around my heart that protected me from expecting too much. College became my escape route. I applied to schools across the country, determined to get as far away from Seattle as possible. When I was accepted to Columbia University in New York with a partial scholarship, I felt a mixture of pride and relief. Finally, a chance to start over, to be somewhere where I wasn't defined by being the adopted daughter who could never quite measure up. David and Patricia drove me to the airport the day I left for New York. Patricia hugged me briefly and said, "Take care of yourself, Sophia. Work hard." David handed me a check for $500 and said, "This should help you get settled." It was a kind gesture, but I knew they had given Emily's high school graduation party a $5,000 budget just a month earlier. As I sat on the plane watching Seattle disappear below me, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. I was leaving behind the only family I'd ever known, but I was also leaving behind the constant reminder that I would never be enough for them. New York was overwhelming and exhilarating. Columbia's campus was a world unto itself, full of brilliant students from every corner of the globe. I threw myself into my studies, majoring in environmental science with a minor in business. I lived in a tiny dorm room, worked in the campus library to pay for textbooks, and slowly began to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to earn love that might never come. I made friends, real friends who knew nothing about my past and accepted me for who I was. Sarah, my roommate, was a fiery redhead from Boston who wanted to be a journalist. Marcus was a quiet philosophy major from Chicago who wrote poetry in his spare time. And there was Alex, a charming art student from California who became my first real boyfriend and showed me what it felt like to be someone's first choice. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. My professors appreciated my work, my friends valued my opinion, and Alex looked at me like I was the most important person in the room. I began to understand that the problem hadn't been with me, it had been with a family that couldn't see my worth. But even as I built this new life, I carried the old wounds with me. I found myself working twice as hard as necessary, constantly trying to prove my value. I struggled with accepting compliments and had a hard time believing that people actually wanted to spend time with me without some ulterior motive. The little girl who had learned she needed to try harder was still there, still trying to earn love she thought she didn't deserve. During my junior year, I took a class called Sustainable Fashion and Social Responsibility that changed my perspective on everything. The professor, Dr. Elena Vasquez, was a former designer who had left the fashion industry to become an activist for workers' rights and environmental protection. She opened my eyes to the devastating impact of fast fashion, the worker exploitation, the environmental destruction, the way the industry convinced consumers they needed new clothes every season while discarding perfectly good items. Fashion should be about self-expression and creativity, Dr. Vasquez said during one lecture, not about exploitation and waste. Every piece of clothing tells a story. We need to make sure those stories don't end in tragedy. I started thinking about all the clothes I'd worn growing up, the hand-me-downs that had made me feel less than, the new outfits Emily received while I made do with old ones. But I also thought about the stories those clothes could tell, the lives they had touched, the possibilities they represented. For my final project, I created a business plan for a company that would create high-quality clothing from discarded materials while providing fair wages to workers. I called it Eco-Threads, threads of sustainability woven together with threads of social responsibility. Dr. Vasquez was so impressed that she encouraged me to apply for entrepreneurship grants and consider turning the idea into reality. That summer, instead of going home to Seattle, I stayed in New York and interned at a small nonprofit that worked with garment workers. I learned about the realities of the fashion industry, met women who worked 14-hour days in dangerous conditions for barely enough to survive, and saw firsthand how consumer choices affected real people's lives. I also learned about myself. Away from the dynamics of my adoptive family, I discovered that I was capable, creative, and strong. I didn't need constant validation to know my worth. I had ideas worth pursuing and the determination to see them through. When I called home to tell David and Patricia about my internship and my plans to start a business, the conversation was brief and polite. "That's wonderful, dear," Patricia said. "Just make sure you have a backup plan." David added, "Business is risky, Sophia. Don't forget you need to think practically about your future." I hung up feeling deflated, but then I remembered Dr. Vasquez's words. "The most revolutionary thing you can do is believe in yourself when others don't." I decided to stop seeking their approval and start building something that mattered to me. My senior year was a whirlwind of classes, job applications, and working on my business plan. I applied for every grant and competition I could find, often staying up until 3 a.m. perfecting presentations and proposals. Alex worried about me burning out, but I felt more energized than I ever had. I wasn't working hard to prove my worth to someone else. I was working hard because I believed in what I was building. The breakthrough came in March when I won a $25,000 entrepreneurship grant from Columbia's business school. The panel of judges was impressed by both the social mission and the financial projections for EcoThreads. "Ms. Reynolds," the head judge said, "you've identified a real problem and created an innovative solution. We're excited to see where you take this." I called home to share the news, expecting at least some acknowledgement of the achievement. Patricia answered the phone, and I could hear Emily practicing piano in the background. "That's nice, Sophia," she said when I told her about the grant. "Emily just got accepted to a summer program at Juilliard. David and I are so proud." I stood in my dorm room holding the phone, listening to Emily's piano scales, and realized that nothing I achieved would ever be enough to earn the kind of pride they felt for their biological daughter. It was a painful moment, but also liberating. I stopped waiting for their approval and started building my future. After graduation, I moved to Seattle, not to be closer to family, but because the city had a growing tech scene and a culture that valued sustainability. I rented a tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill and set up EcoThreads in a shared workspace downtown. My first year was a struggle. I worked 16-hour days, sourcing materials from textile waste facilities, finding ethical manufacturers, and building an online presence with no marketing budget. There were nights when I ate ramen noodles for dinner and wondered if I was delusional to think I could build a successful business from scratch. I applied for dozens of jobs, thinking maybe I should get a real career and pursue EcoThreads as a side project. But every time I was tempted to give up, I thought about the garment workers I'd met, about the environmental damage I'd learned about the possibility of creating something that could make a real difference. The turning point came in my second year when a local blogger wrote about EcoThreads, calling it the future of fashion. Orders started pouring in faster than I could fulfill them. I hired my first employee, Maria, a seamstress from El Salvador who had been laid off from a factory. Then came Jake, a recent grad with a marketing degree and a passion for environmental causes. By my third year, EcoThreads was featured in Vogue as one of 10 sustainable brands to watch. We had a team of 15 people, partnerships with major recycling facilities, and customers across the country. I was invited to speak at conferences about sustainable business practices and was featured on the cover of Seattle Business Magazine as Entrepreneur of the Year. But success in business didn't fill the emotional void I'd carried since childhood. I was proud of what I'd built, but I still felt disconnected from the idea of family. I dated sporadically but struggled to let anyone get too close. I had learned early that love could be conditional, and part of me was always waiting for people to decide I wasn't worth the effort. It was during this time that I started therapy with Dr. Jennifer Park, a warm and insightful psychologist who specialized in attachment issues. In our sessions, I began to unpack the layers of hurt and self-doubt I'd accumulated over the years. The first few therapy sessions were difficult. I sat in Dr. Park's comfortable office, surrounded by plants and soft lighting, struggling to articulate feelings I'd buried for decades. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted during our second meeting. "I feel like I've been running for so long that I've forgotten what I'm running from." Dr. Park leaned forward, her expression gentle but focused. "Let's start with right now. How do you feel in this moment?" Tired, I said without hesitation. Successful but exhausted. Like I'm always waiting for someone to tell me I don't deserve what I've built. That session opened a floodgate. Week after week, I explored the intricate ways my childhood had shaped my adult relationships. I talked about how I chose romantic partners who were emotionally unavailable, unconsciously recreating the dynamic of having to earn love. I discussed my tendency to overwork myself into exhaustion, as if rest was something I had to deserve rather than simply need. Sophia, Dr. Park said during one particularly intense session, you've built an incredible life and business, but you're still operating from a place of trying to prove your worth. What would it look like to simply know your worth without needing external validation? The question haunted me for weeks. I realized that even my proudest achievements felt hollow because they were motivated by a desperate need to prove that I mattered. The little girl who had been told she was just adopted was still driving the bus, still trying to earn a place at the table. Dr. Park introduced me to various therapeutic techniques. We did EMDR sessions to process traumatic memories, practiced mindfulness to help me stay present rather than constantly preparing for future rejection, and worked on cognitive behavioral strategies to challenge the negative thought patterns I'd developed. One breakthrough came when Dr. Park asked me to write a letter to my childhood self. What would you tell that 7-year-old girl who just learned she had to try harder to belong in her own family? I spent hours crafting that letter, tears streaming down my face as I wrote. Dear little Sophia, you are not broken. You are not too much or not enough. The adults around you are struggling with their own limitations, and their inability to love you fully is not a reflection of your worthiness. You are beautiful, brilliant, and deserving of unconditional love. You don't have to earn your place in the world, you belong here simply because you exist. The family that can't see your value is missing out on something extraordinary. One day you'll find people who love you not for what you accomplish, but for who you are. Hold on, sweet girl. Your story is just beginning. Reading that letter aloud in Dr. Park's office was one of the most emotional experiences of my life. For the first time, I felt genuine compassion for the child I had been, rather than frustration with her neediness. Around this same time, my business was facing its own challenges. The success of EcoThreads had attracted competitors, some of whom were copying our designs without adhering to our ethical standards. I was dealing with supply chain disruptions, cash flow problems, and the stress of managing a growing team. One particularly difficult week, 3 major orders were canceled due to shipping delays, and I had to lay off 2 employees I genuinely cared about. I found myself spiraling into the old patterns of self-blame and overwork. Maybe I'm not cut out for this, I confided to Dr. Park. Maybe David and Patricia were right to not invest too much hope in me. Sophia, Dr. Park said firmly, successful people face setbacks. That's part of building something meaningful. The question isn't whether you'll encounter challenges, it's how you'll respond to them. Are you going to let temporary difficulties confirm old stories about your unworthiness, or are you going to see them as normal parts of the entrepreneurial journey? Her words helped me reframe the situation. Instead of seeing the business challenges as evidence of my inadequacy, I began to view them as opportunities to problem solve and grow. I reached out to my network for advice, negotiated new payment terms with suppliers, and gradually rebuilt what I'd lost. The experience taught me something crucial about resilience. The difference between my childhood and my adult life wasn't that challenges had disappeared. It was that I now had tools to handle them and people who supported me through them. During this period, I also deepened my relationship with the girls in my mentoring program. Every Thursday evening, I met with a group of 8 young women aged 16 to 18, all from foster care or difficult family situations. Our meetings took place in EcoThreads' conference room, but the atmosphere was more like a living room than a boardroom. There was Destiny, the brilliant girl I'd connected with so strongly, who was now applying to colleges despite having no family support. Maria Elena had aged out of foster care at 18 and was working 2 jobs while finishing high school. Jasmine had been in 12 different homes and struggled to trust anyone, but was slowly opening up in our group setting. These girls taught me as much as I taught them. Their resilience in the face of abandonment, abuse, and systemic failure was extraordinary. They had learned to survive by becoming self-reliant in ways that reminded me of my own coping mechanisms. "Ms. Reynolds," Destiny said one evening, "how do you know when someone really cares about you? Like, how do you tell the difference between someone who actually loves you and someone who just wants something from you?" The question broke my heart because I recognized the hypervigilance it represented, the exhausting work of constantly evaluating others' motives, never able to simply receive love without suspicion. I told her carefully, "that people who really care about you show up consistently, even when it's not convenient for them. They celebrate your successes without trying to take credit, and they support you through difficulties without making it about them. They respect your boundaries and don't try to change you into someone else." As I spoke, I realized I was describing the kind of love I'd found with James, with my closest friends, and with my chosen family. It was also the kind of love I tried to offer these girls, unconditional, consistent, and empowering rather than controlling. One of my proudest moments came when Destiny was accepted to Stanford University with a full scholarship. She called me crying with joy, and I found myself crying too. "I never thought this was possible," she said. "Thank you for believing in me." "I didn't make this happen," I told her. "You did the work, you earned this. I just saw what was already there." That night, I thought about all the people who had believed in me along the way: Dr. Vasquez, who encouraged my business idea; Alex, who showed me what healthy love looked like; Sarah, who had been a true friend through every phase of my life. I began to understand that healing wasn't just about recovering from hurt, it was about learning to recognize and receive love when it was offered authentically. It was a question that haunted me for weeks. I realized that even my success with EcoThreads was partially motivated by a desire to show David and Patricia that they had underestimated me. I was still that little girl trying to earn love through achievement. Dr. Park helped me understand that my adoptive parents' inability to love me equally wasn't a reflection of my value as a person. Some people, she explained, have limitations in their capacity for love that have nothing to do with the worthiness of the people around them. Your job isn't to overcome those limitations, it's to recognize them and build a life that doesn't depend on them. As I worked through these realizations, I began to make different choices. I started dating James, a kind and patient man who worked as a social worker and understood something about helping people heal from difficult pasts. I deepened my friendships, allowing myself to be vulnerable with people who had earned my trust. I even reached out to some of my former Columbia friends, rebuilding connections I'd let lapse in my focus on work. Most importantly, I started a mentorship program through EcoThreads, working with young women from foster care and difficult family situations. Every month, I met with a group of teenage girls, helping them with everything from college applications to business ideas to simply believing in themselves. One of these girls, Destiny, reminded me so much of myself at that age. She was brilliant and driven but carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned not to expect too much. During one of our sessions, she said, "Ms. Reynolds, do you think people like us can really have normal families someday?" Her question broke my heart and opened it at the same time. "Destiny," I said, "we get to choose our families. Sometimes that means the people who raise us, and sometimes it means the people we find along the way. But either way, we deserve to be loved completely, just as we are." It was in that moment that I realized I had found my family. In my employees who trusted me with their livelihoods, in my friends who celebrated my successes and supported me through failures, in the girls I mentored who reminded me that healing was possible. I had spent so many years focused on the family that couldn't love me properly that I'd almost missed the family I'd built for myself. Still, there was unfinished business with David and Patricia. I hadn't spoken to them in almost 2 years, not since a brief and awkward phone call when EcoThreads was featured in a national magazine. They had congratulated me politely, but the conversation felt stilted and formal, like we were strangers making small talk. When I received an invitation to Emily's college graduation party, I was surprised. Emily was finishing her degree at University of Washington, the same state school David had suggested I attend to keep costs reasonable when I was applying to colleges. The invitation was beautifully designed, with embossed lettering and a photo of Emily in her cap and gown. I almost didn't go. James encouraged me to skip it, worried about how the visit might affect me emotionally. But Dr. Park thought it might be an opportunity for closure. You don't need their approval anymore, Sophia, she said. But you might need to see that for yourself. I decided to attend, but not as the insecure girl who had left Seattle 6 years earlier. I was going as the successful businesswoman I'd become, someone who had built something meaningful from nothing. I bought a beautiful dress, one of my own designs, made from recycled silk and dyed with natural pigments, and drove to the Morrison house on a sunny Saturday afternoon. The house looked exactly the same, down to the perfectly manicured garden and the golden retriever, Buster's successor, apparently, lounging on the front porch. But walking up that familiar path, I felt different. I wasn't the little girl desperate for approval anymore. I was a woman who had learned her own worth. Patricia answered the door, and for a moment we just looked at each other. She had aged more than I expected, with gray streaking through her brown hair and lines around her eyes. Sophia, she said, her voice warm but uncertain. You look wonderful. Thank you for coming. The backyard was full of people, Emily's friends from school, David's colleagues, neighbors I remembered from childhood. Emily looked radiant in a flowing sundress, her dark hair styled in elaborate curls. She was surrounded by friends and admirers, clearly the center of attention in a way that felt natural and effortless. When she saw me, Emily broke away from her group and came over. Sophia, I can't believe you came. She hugged me warmly, and I was struck by how genuine her smile seemed. I've been following eco-threads on Instagram. Your clothes are amazing. We talked for a few minutes about her graduation, her plans to work at a nonprofit focused on education reform. She seemed excited and idealistic, full of plans to change the world. I found myself genuinely happy for her, free from the resentment I'd carried for so long. I'm really proud of you, I told her, and meant it. It sounds like you're going to do great things. Emily looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sophia, can I ask you something? When I nodded, she continued, Do you think Mom and Dad treated us differently when we were growing up? The question caught me off guard. I had assumed Emily was either oblivious to the disparities or simply accepted them as normal. What do you think? I asked carefully. Emily looked around the party, then back at me. I think they did. And I think it wasn't fair to you. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I've been in therapy this year, working through some things, and I've realized that I got a lot of advantages that you didn't. I don't know how to fix that, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. Her honesty was unexpected and moving. For years, I had resented Emily for what I saw as her unconscious acceptance of favoritism. Learning that she had recognized it too and felt some responsibility for it shifted something in my heart. We were interrupted by David calling for everyone's attention. He stood on the deck, holding a champagne glass, ready to make a toast. Thank you all for celebrating Emily's graduation with us, he began. Patricia and I are so proud of our daughter and all she's accomplished. He went on to talk about Emily's achievements, her bright future, their hopes for her happiness. It was a loving father's tribute to his daughter, and listening to it, I felt a familiar pang of longing for that kind of unconditional pride and support. But then David did something unexpected. Before we toast Emily, he said, I want to acknowledge someone else who's here today. Many of you know that Sophia is our adopted daughter, and some of you may have read about her success with her company eco-threads. My heart started racing. I hadn't expected to be mentioned at all, let alone in front of the entire party. Sophia has built something remarkable, David continued, and Patricia and I want her to know how proud we are of everything she's accomplished. He raised his glass toward me. To both our daughters Emily and Sophia, for making us proud in their own unique ways. The crowd toasted and I stood there holding my untouched champagne, not sure how to feel. It was the acknowledgement I had craved for so many years, but it came decades too late and felt somehow hollow. I was grateful for the gesture, but I no longer needed their pride to feel complete. After the toast, Patricia approached me. Sophia, could we talk privately for a moment? We walked to the front porch, away from the party noise. Patricia sat down on the swing where she used to read me bedtime stories, and I took the chair across from her. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. David and we made mistakes when you were growing up. We didn't treat you and Emily equally, and that was wrong. I waited for her to continue, not sure what to say. When Emily was born, Patricia went on, something changed in me. I had struggled with infertility for so long, and when I finally had a biological child, I think I got caught up in that connection in a way that wasn't fair to you. She looked out at the garden, her voice growing quieter. I convinced myself that you were more independent, that you didn't need as much attention. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of what? I asked. Scared that if I loved you the way I loved Emily, I might lose you someday. You weren't biologically ours, and I think part of me always worried that you might want to find your birth parents or decide we weren't really your family. She turned to look at me, tears in her eyes. So I held back, and in trying to protect myself from losing you, I ended up pushing you away. Her explanation didn't excuse years of differential treatment, but it helped me understand it. Patricia had been operating from her own fears and limitations, not from any lack of worth on my part. I know it's too late to change how we raised you, Patricia continued, but I want you to know that David and I do love you. We're proud of the woman you've become, and we're sorry we didn't do a better job of showing you that when it mattered most. I sat there on the porch where I'd spent so many childhood afternoons, listening to this long overdue apology. Part of me felt vindicated. I had been right about the differential treatment, and they were finally admitting it. But another part of me felt oddly detached, like we were discussing someone else's childhood. Thank you for saying that, I told Patricia finally. It means something to hear it. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of the conversation. Sophia, Patricia said eventually, I know we can't undo the past, but is there any possibility of having a relationship now? I'd like to try to be the mother I should have been all along. I looked at this woman who had shaped so much of my early life, who had given me both security and pain in equal measure. I felt compassion for her, understanding that she had been limited by her own fears and insecurities. But I also knew that I didn't need her mothering anymore. I had learned to mother myself, to build the life and relationships I needed. I'd like that, I said carefully, but it would have to be different than before. I'm not the little girl who needed your approval anymore. I'm a woman who's built her own life, and any relationship we have now would have to be between equals. Patricia nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. I understand. And I respect that. We talked for a little while longer, and I found myself telling her about EcoThreads, about James, about the mentoring program I'd started. She listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and seeming surprised by the scope of what I'd built. When it was time to leave, both David and Patricia hugged me goodbye, real hugs, not the polite embraces I remembered from childhood. Emily promised to keep in touch, and I found myself believing she meant it. Driving back to my apartment, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. The apology I'd longed for had finally come, but it didn't bring the healing I had once thought it would. I realized that I had already healed, through therapy and hard work and building a life surrounded by people who loved me unconditionally. The relationship with David and Patricia did evolve over the following months. We had dinner occasionally, exchanged emails about our work and interests, and slowly built something that resembled a normal adult relationship. It wasn't the close family bond one had once craved, but it was honest and respectful. More importantly, I deepened my chosen family. James and I moved in together, creating a home filled with laughter and understanding. My friendship with Sarah from college grew stronger as we supported each other through various life challenges. The girls in my mentoring program became like daughters to me, and I watched with pride as they graduated from high school and started their own journeys toward independence. EcoThreads continued to grow, but I learned to define success more broadly than just financial metrics. We implemented a program that provided job training for women transitioning out of homelessness. We partnered with schools to teach students about sustainable fashion. We donated a percentage of profits to organizations working to improve conditions for garment workers worldwide. Most importantly, I learned to see my origin story differently. Yes, I had been abandoned as a baby and struggled with feeling unwanted in my adoptive family. But I had also been rescued by an orphanage that cared for me, adopted by people who provided for me even if imperfectly, and supported by teachers, friends, and mentors who helped me become who I was meant to be. I stopped defining myself by what I had lacked and started celebrating what I had built. I was no longer Sophia the abandoned orphan or Sophia the unfavored adopted daughter. I was Sophia the entrepreneur, Sophia the mentor, Sophia the woman who had learned that love is something you create, not something you earn. On my 31st birthday, James threw me a surprise party at EcoThreads headquarters. The guest list was a perfect representation of my chosen family employees who had become friends, college buddies who had stood by me through various adventures, girls from my mentoring program who were now succeeding in college and careers, Dr. Park who had helped me heal, and even David, Patricia, and Emily who were learning to be part of my life in a new way. As I looked around the room at all these people who had chosen to celebrate with me, I felt a deep sense of belonging that had nothing to do with blood relations or legal documents. These were my people and I was theirs, not because we had to be, but because we wanted to be. The party was a beautiful reflection of the life I'd built. Sarah had flown in from Boston, where she was now a successful investigative journalist. Marcus came from Chicago with his partner David, and they brought copies of his newly published poetry collection. Alex surprised me by driving up from California. We had remained close friends after our romantic relationship ended, and his presence meant everything to me. My EcoThreads team had decorated the space with fairy lights and displays of our most beautiful pieces. Maria, my first employee, had become our head of production and was now training other women in advanced sewing techniques. Jake had evolved from marketing coordinator to creative director, and his innovative campaigns had helped establish EcoThreads as a leader in sustainable fashion. But perhaps the most meaningful presence was that of my mentoring group. 6 of the 8 girls I'd been working with were there, dressed in outfits they'd chosen from EcoThreads' collection. Destiny was home from Stanford for spring break, radiant with confidence and full of stories about her engineering courses. Maria Elena had just been accepted to community college and was planning to study business. Even Jasmine, who rarely spoke in our early sessions, gave a short speech about how the group had helped her learn to trust again. 3 years ago, Jasmine said, her voice steady and clear, I thought family was just a word people used to hurt you. But watching Sophia build this community, learning about chosen family, it changed everything for me. Now I know that love isn't something you have to earn. It's something you create together. Dr. Park was there too, beaming with pride at the transformation she'd witnessed. Sophia, she said quietly during a lull in the festivities, do you remember what you said in our first session? You said you felt like you'd been running for so long that you'd forgotten what you were running from. Look around. You're not running anymore. You've planted roots. James had been planning the party for weeks, coordinating with everyone in my life to make sure it was perfect. As the evening wound down and we cleaned up together, he pulled me aside. I have one more surprise, he said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. My heart stopped. We'd talked about marriage, but I hadn't expected a proposal at my birthday party. Sophia, he said, dropping to one knee right there among the champagne glasses and birthday decorations, you've taught me that family isn't about where you come from, it's about who you choose to love and who chooses to love you back. Will you choose me? Will you build a family with me? Through happy tears, I said yes. The ring was perfect, a vintage piece with a recycled diamond, ethically sourced and designed by a local artisan. It represented everything we both valued: sustainability, craftsmanship, and conscious choices. As our friends and chosen family erupted in cheers around us, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The little girl who had felt invisible, who had been told she needed to try harder to belong, had grown into a woman surrounded by love she'd chosen and cultivated. The months following my engagement were a whirlwind of wedding planning, business expansion, and continued growth. EcoThreads had caught the attention of several major retailers, and we were negotiating partnerships that would allow us to scale our impact significantly. The challenge was maintaining our ethical standards while growing larger, something many sustainable brands struggled with. I spent weeks visiting potential manufacturing partners, ensuring they met our standards for worker treatment and environmental responsibility. In one factory in North Carolina, I met Rosa, a seamstress who had been working in garment manufacturing for 20 years. She told me about losing her previous job when the factory moved overseas, leaving hundreds of workers unemployed. When companies like yours choose to manufacture here with good wages and safe conditions, Rosa said, you're not just making clothes, you're giving people dignity. Her words reinforced my commitment to keeping EcoThreads' growth aligned with our values. The wedding planning process also brought unexpected healing. James and I decided to have the ceremony in the backyard of Dr. Park's Retreat Center, a beautiful space surrounded by gardens and overlooking Puget Sound. It felt right to be married in a place associated with growth and healing. When it came time to decide who would walk me down the aisle, I faced a question I'd never expected to consider. David had tentatively offered during one of our increasingly frequent family dinners. The gesture was kind, but it didn't feel authentic to who I'd become. Instead, I asked Destiny to do the honor. She had graduated from Stanford and was now working as an environmental engineer, but more importantly, she had become like a daughter to me. You taught me that we get to choose our families, I told her when I asked. You're my family, and I want you to be part of the most important day of my life. The wedding was small and intimate, about 50 people who represented the various chapters of my life and the community I'd built. Sarah was my maid of honor, and Emily surprised me by asking if she could read a poem during the ceremony. The poem she chose was about second chances, chosen families, and the courage to love despite past wounds. David and Patricia attended, and while our relationship remained somewhat formal, there was a warmth there that hadn't existed in my childhood. During the reception, Patricia pulled me aside. Sophia, I know I can never undo the mistakes I made when you were young, but I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become and the family you've chosen. Her words brought tears to my eyes. Not because I still needed her approval, but because they represented the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds with time and mutual effort. The most emotional moment came during the father-daughter dance. Instead of dancing with David, I had asked Dr. Park to join me. She had been the one to help me understand that I was worthy of love, to guide me through the process of healing and growth. As we danced to Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, she whispered, You've become everything you were always meant to be. James and I honeymooned in Costa Rica, visiting sustainable fashion cooperatives and learning about innovative textile production methods. It was the perfect blend of romance and purpose, representing our shared commitment to building a life that was both personally fulfilling and socially meaningful. When we returned, we found that EcoThreads had been selected as one of Time magazine's companies changing the world. The article highlighted our innovative use of textile waste, our fair labor practices, and our mentorship program. Reading it, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not because external recognition validated my worth, but because it meant our message was reaching more people. The success brought new opportunities and challenges. We were invited to expand internationally, with potential partners in Europe and South America interested in bringing EcoThreads to their markets. The growth was exciting but also overwhelming, requiring careful planning to maintain the personal touch and ethical standards that defined our brand. One evening, as James and I sat in our apartment planning our next moves, I found myself thinking about the different versions of myself I'd been over the years. The abandoned child in the orphanage, the eager adoptee trying to earn love, the rejected teenager, the struggling college student, the determined entrepreneur, and now the wife and business leader I'd become. Do you think our childhood experiences ever stop shaping us? I asked James as we reviewed expansion plans. He considered the question carefully. I think they always influence us, but we get to choose how. You could have let your experiences make you bitter or closed off. Instead, you used them to develop empathy and drive. That's not despite your childhood, that's because of how you chose to respond to it. His insight resonated deeply. I realized that my difficult early years had given me gifts I might not have developed otherwise: resilience, empathy for others who felt marginalized, and a deep appreciation for authentic relationships. The pain had been real, but so was the strength I'd developed in response to it. As EcoThreads continued to grow, I made sure that our expansion included more programs for young people aging out of foster care. We developed internship programs, scholarship funds, and partnerships with organizations serving at-risk youth. Every young person we helped felt like a small victory against the systems that had failed me and so many others. The work wasn't always easy. Some of the young people we tried to help had been hurt so deeply that they struggled to accept support. Others made choices that broke my heart. But for every setback, there were also incredible successes: young people who found their footing, developed skills, and went on to build meaningful lives. One young man, Marcus, named for my college friend, had been particularly challenging to work with. He had aged out of foster care with no support system and had been living on the streets when he was referred to our program. His initial attitude was hostile and defensive. He saw our offers of help as charity that came with strings attached. It took months of consistent outreach before Marcus began to trust us. Slowly, he started participating in our job training program, learning textile production skills. His natural talent for design became apparent, and we developed a special apprenticeship program for him. 2 years later, Marcus presented his own collection at Seattle Fashion Week, clothing designed specifically for people experiencing homelessness, with features like hidden pockets for securing belongings and layering systems for warmth. The collection was both beautiful and functional, representing exactly the kind of innovation that happened when we centered the needs of marginalized communities. "You saved my life," Marcus told me after his show, tears in his eyes. "No," I replied, hugging him tight, "you saved your own life. We just provided some tools and support along the way." In my speech that night, I talked about the journey from abandonment to belonging, from seeking approval to knowing my worth, from surviving to thriving. "Family," I said, "isn't just about who raised you or who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up for you, who believes in you, and who loves you not for what you achieve but for who you are." The party lasted until well past midnight, filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of easy affection that comes from relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. As I finally said goodbye to the last guests, I realized that the little girl who had once felt invisible had become a woman who was truly seen. This is my story, a journey from shadows to light, from seeking love to creating it, from feeling abandoned to building belonging. I share it not for pity or praise, but in the hope that it might resonate with someone else who has felt invisible, unwanted, or not enough. You are enough exactly as you are. And if your original family can't see that, it's their limitation, not your failure. The most radical thing you can do is believe in yourself when others don't, love yourself when others won't, and build the life you deserve regardless of where you started. Your story isn't defined by how it begins, but by how you choose to write it. And mine? Mine is still being written, one choice, one relationship, one act of love at a time.